Very glad that you're here. Thankful for this occasion. Last night of the quarter. So, for better or worse, we're going to finish up tonight in our study of the years of silence. But I do appreciate your kind attention this quarter, and I appreciate your interest in this subject, and I hope that it's been of some benefit to you. Let me make mention before we get started that I'll be teaching this subject next quarter to the middle class, and so for those who have parents here who have children involved in that, we do have the syllabus in the back, and we don't follow it exactly, but at least it'll give us a good start, and I know that you all work with your children at home, and so this based on Brother Walden's study guide, so make use of that as you feel the need. Okay. Before we do begin tonight, we'll take time to offer a word of prayer together. And we're sure glad again to see everyone here this evening. Appreciate your presence. Let's bow together and we'll begin with a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we're so thankful for this day and its blessings, and that we can come together this night and we can open thy word and we can be instructed and be encouraged and be warned by the story lived out so long ago that speaks to us so clearly today. We do pray that we might learn its lessons, that we might be attentive to thee, that we might see all through the centuries, Father, thy work, thy hand, as you have brought about your plan to save man from sin. And for this we give thee thanks and praise, and we ask that you would help all of the classes, Father, to concentrate and to think carefully about the truth, and may it be presented clearly and reverently. We ask that you would be with and bless some of our number who are away from us. Bless each one gathered here. Forgive us and keep us now in Christ's holy name. Amen. Okay. Years of silence. I want you to go back with me to the book of Daniel, the 8th chapter. When we said the years of silence, of course, we do not mean that these are years we know nothing about. We know quite a bit about it. And it's not even that the Bible doesn't speak to it, but it speaks to it prophetically rather than speaking to it in terms of a currently written narrative. So in Daniel chapter 8, you have this vision. We've talked about this a couple of times already, where Daniel is shown the clashing between two great empires, the Persian Empire, which was currently in power, and the Greek Empire, which is not yet even seen in its full power, but that Daniel saw clearly by the help of God would come and would actually overcome the Persian Empire. The Persians are represented by a great ram in this vision. That's explained to us in verse 20 of chapter 8. But the rough he-goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn between his eyes is the first king. We know the history looking back, and we know Alexander was this great conqueror. But if you skip down, you'll notice how that great horn would be broken. Look at verse 8. And therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken. And for it came up four notable ones toward the four winds of heaven. And so the kingdom will be divided. And out of that divide, we find in the next verse, there would be a little horn that would come up with a big mouth speaking blasphemy and working blasphemy. Verse 9, out of one of them, came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. And it grew great even to the host of heaven. And some of the host and some of the stars it threw down to the ground and trampled on them. It became great, even as great as the prince of the host. And the regular burnt offering was taken away from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown, and the host will be given over to it together with the regular burnt offering because of transgression. And it will throw truth to the ground, and it will act and prosper. And then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one who spoke, for how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary, and the host to be trampled underfoot? And he said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary will be restored to its rightful state. Looking back in history, I think we can, without question, find the Greek general, the Greek leader, who would make it his quest to try to destroy the work of God and the temple at Jerusalem. And that fellow's name was Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus IV, sometimes he's called. He reigned in history from about 175 to around 164, so about 10 or 11 years. The 2,300 days was not intended to be taken literally. It's an expression the prophets used. It comes out to a 3.5-year period. It's a period of persecution. Almost always that figure is used associated with a time when it seems evil is allowed to prosper. And that certainly was true about Antiochus for a period of time. He waged war on Judaism. We looked last time we were together at how this Antiochus went down to Egypt and his ambitions were thwarted to some extent. When he came back, he used the excuse to unleash his fury upon the Jews, whom he considered to be in rebellion. We also talked about last time how that we find a very helpful historical account in a work like 1st and 2nd Maccabees. These are not inspired works. They're not offered as inspired text. We read them as we might read Josephus, or as we might read Tacitus, or some other ancient source that lived close to the time or during the time about which they're writing. These writings would have been written somewhere in the 1st or maybe the 2nd century before the time of Christ, well after the Old Testament record was closed. They were never considered to be canonical by the Jews, or still not. And they're not by most people who would claim to have respect for the Bible. But they are a good history. So, when you look at a book like 1st Maccabees, he's talking about these very events. And he talks about how that he came back from Egypt, and this is 1st Maccabees chapter 1 and verse 20, that Antiochus returned in the 143rd year, and he came against Israel, and he came to Jerusalem with a strong force. How that he arrogantly entered the sanctuary, and how that he stole a lot of goods, the precious metals and all the things that he took off. Another occasion when he came against the city, down in verse 30, and suddenly fell upon the city and dealt it a severe blow and destroyed many people of Israel. He plundered the city and burned it with fire and tore its houses down and its surrounding walls. And they took captive men and women and seized the livestock. But then he talks in the latter part of this chapter about another wave of persecution against the Jews. The king sent letters by his messengers to Jerusalem and to the town of Judah and directed them to follow customs strange to the land, to forbid burnt offerings and sacrifices and drink offerings in the sanctuary, to profane Sabbaths and festivals, to defile the sanctuary and the priest, to build altars and sacred precincts and shrines for idols, to sacrifice swine and other unclean animals, and to leave their sons uncircumcised, to forget the law and change all the ordinances, and whoever does not obey this command of the king shall die. Does that sound like what Daniel was writing about? And so it was, his forces came to the temple and erected a desolating sacrilege on the altar of burnt offering. We're not exactly sure. He doesn't specify exactly what that was, but there are other sources that suggest that perhaps some shrine to Zeus was put up over the altar of God at that place. They also built altars in the surrounding towns. And the books of the law that they found were torn to pieces and burned with fire. Anyone possessing books of the covenant or anyone who adhered to the law was condemned to death by the decree of the king. They put to death, he says, women who had their children circumcised and their families and those who circumcised them. They hung the infants, the dead infants, around the mother's necks. It's just as bad as you can imagine. This was a vicious, evil campaign. You know, these people were evil in their intent. You can see a little glimmer of them in the eyes of some of the folks I see around me today when I watch the news for a minute. But anyway, Antiochus was an evil man. In 2 Maccabees, which by the way, 2 Maccabees, if you're familiar with it, is not really talking about a different time, it's just a different account of a lot of the same things. So it's not like 1st and 2nd Chronicles that take place with separate histories of different eras. But anyway, 2 Maccabees talks about how he was harsh and utterly grievous in the onslaught of evil. The temple was filled with debauchery and reveling by the Gentiles who dallied with prostitutes and had intercourse with women within the sacred precincts, and besides brought in things for sacrifice that were unfit. It is widely reported that they offered a pig in sacrifice at the temple to Zeus, just to show their contempt for the temple. The altar was covered with abominable offerings that were forbidden by the law. People could neither keep the Sabbath nor observe the festivals of their ancestors, nor so much as confess themselves to be Jews. Anyway, a lot more could be read. But this is where we find the rise of an opposition. There were some people who just would not take it anymore. And particularly, we call this group the Maccabees. Why? How does that come about? If we had more time, we'd go back and continue reading in 1 Maccabees. And we'd notice how that there was a priest who rose up in opposition to these things. His name was Mattathias. He had moved away from Jerusalem to a little town in Modin, which is just northeast of Jerusalem, northwest, I should say, of Jerusalem. But, of course, Antiochus was going through the country with these altars demanding that people Jews offer to Zeus, offer to the pagan gods. They came to Modin. They knew about Mattathias. He was a well-respected man with a large family. And so, as the book tells us, the Syrian official, the Greek official, went to him and said, look, you're a man of influence. You need to show your leadership here and offer to Zeus. And the king will consider you to be a faithful servant, and he will reward you with gold and silver. And there's a great speech by Mattathias in which he says, I don't care what they give, there's no way I'll do that. He said it better than I did, but I'm summing it up. So anyway, hearing this deal, another one of the Jews perked up and said, I'll offer. And it so infuriated Mattathias that he took a sword and killed that man on the spot and killed the Syrian official on the spot too. Well, no going back now. And so Mattathias and his sons made their way to the hills. And that was sort of the spark that set off a confirmed opposition to what the Syrian Greeks were trying to do here. The Hasmonean family, by the way, their ancestor, Hasmoneus, this is the family name. Mattathias and his sons were considered a part of the Hasmonean family. And he had 5 sons here, and all of these men took their turn. And then we'll see in the next generation another man named John, who likewise will be significant. All these people are significant. We don't have time to talk about them all. But Mattathias, not long after the rebellion began, died. He was an older man. And his sons took their turn in leadership. But in particular, this man Judas becomes a very prominent name. He was a great military leader, a natural military genius. And he developed a nickname. I don't know where he got it, but he was called Maccabeus, which from the Hebrew through the English, through the Greek, through the Latin into our English, comes out Maccabee, which means the hammer. The hammer. You know, I got a chance to go over and visit in England and got to see the Westminster Abbey, and they have there Edward I, who was a Middle age king and subdued Scotland, and he has there on his tomb, he had printed on the tomb or painted upon the side of the tomb, Edward Rex, Hammer of the Scots. You know, he was rather proud of that. We know exactly what that means. You know, he was the man who came and subdued Scotland. Well, that was Judas. He was the hammer of God against the enemies of God's people. And he is a great leader in this revolt. We will not take time tonight to talk about all the interesting stories that you can read in history about his campaign. He was always outnumbered, but always found a way to outsmart his enemies. One of the great examples of that came at a place that we know maybe for other reasons, Emmaus. We know about the two men on the road to Emmaus. Well, a long time before that happened in Luke, Emmaus was the site of a great battle between these Greek forces and the now swelled ranks of Judas Maccabeus. And the story goes, they thought they had him dead to rights, and so one day they took off after him. They had, I don't know, probably twice as many as he had. But Judas had intelligence, and so he found out what they were planning to do. So he left his camp, circled back around, and attacked the camp of the Greeks. It wasn't unguarded, but it was certainly much less fortified than if the soldiers had been home, and took them. And then by the time the Greeks realized that, well, they're not here, they must have gone to the hills. We've looked through the hills, we can't find them. And they go back home, they find his army sitting there in their camp, which was greatly demoralizing to them. And so even though they still had quite a number, they wound up getting chased off. It's one of those great stories that sort of typifies the way things seemed to work for a long time for Judas. After he'd had all these successes and he gained a bit of room, he came back to Jerusalem. And he found the desecration of the temple. I'm sure he was aware of it, but it was a horrible thing to see. But now they would take time to make a change. And so in 1 Maccabees chapter 4, again, we'll not maybe belabor this point by reading all of these verses, but after they came back, they had the purpose, he says, "See, our enemies are crushed. Let us go up to cleanse the sanctuary and to dedicate it." So all the army assembled and went up to Mount Zion. And so Judas detailed, I should say, men to fight against those in the citadel until he had cleansed the sanctuary. And he chose blameless priests devoted to the law, and they cleansed the sanctuary and removed the defiled stones to an unclean place. They decided that the altar was beyond hope, and so they tore it down and took the stones off to a separate place and used uncut stones, unhewn stones as the law directs, and built a new altar like the former one. They thought it just too far gone to ever use again. So, and they remade some of the implements there, including the lampstand. They placed bread again upon the table, and they hung the curtains, and they finished the work that they had undertaken. And so they dedicated it with songs and with harps and lutes and cymbals. Verse 56 says they celebrated the dedication of the altar for 8 days, and joyfully offered burnt offerings, and they offered sacrifice of well-being and a thank offering and so on. So an 8-day celebration of the cleansing of the temple. Now, the Jews through the years have added a story about how that when they found the menorah, or they remade it somehow, they made the menorah, but they didn't have enough oil for the 8 days. They had just 1 day's supply of oil. But as it turned out, the 1 day's supply of oil miraculously lasted for 8 days. That story is not found in Maccabees, much less the Bible. But that has gone a long way toward the story. But the Feast of Dedication, a feast celebrating the cleansing of the temple, is real. And you remember in John the 10th chapter, how that on one occasion Jesus was in Jerusalem, and it was the time, John says, of the Feast of Dedication. That's John 10:22, isn't it? So this is a feast that developed after the close of the law, but it was certainly celebrated by many of the Jews. And today, it's the feast that we know as what? Hanukkah. Yeah, everybody knows that. In fact, it may be going on now or ending now. I don't know exactly. I didn't check. But anyway, it certainly has, through the years, then Judas and all his brothers and all the assembly of Israel determined that every year at that season, the days of dedication of the altar should be observed with joy and gladness for 8 days. So they still do. But anyway, that all goes back to the time period we're talking about right now. Judas was able to carve out a patch of freedom for the Jews, a place where they had some measure of autonomy against the mighty Syrians, who obviously were slipping at this point, the Seleucids. And so Judas eventually wound up not coming out of one of those battles when he was badly outnumbered. He was killed, but others stepped in his place. He had several brothers, including Jonathan. And Jonathan turned out to be quite successful, both as a negotiator and as a warrior. And so Jonathan even expanded the territory. And then under the days of John Hyrcanus, who was the next generation, a grandson of the old man, they had perhaps their greatest, the Hasmoneans had their greatest extent of territory. This almost looks like one of the maps of Solomon, doesn't it? Not quite. But they had great success. They reconquered Samaria. And they also conquered this territory down here, which you can't see because of this silly purple color with the black font. But that is the old Edomite territory. By this time, it is known as Idumea. And so the Idumeans now were conquered and forced to become proselytes, to become Jews. Their men were circumcised. They were not given a choice about that matter. And so from this time on, the Idumeans were numbered among the Jews, so to speak. And that's significant, and probably you remember why. We'll talk about that in just a second. Let me go back to this chart here of the Hasmoneans. Again, too small to see, I grant you. But know that after the days of John Hyrcanus, there was, as there always is, division. There was a lot of intrigue. There were all kinds of problems that came along. At one point, a question about who is going to be the ruling voice, who's going to get the priesthood, the high priesthood, between two brothers, Aristobulus and Hyrcanus. And this wound up being really a civil war that in part was settled when Hyrcanus and Aristobulus made an agreement together. Hyrcanus would receive the position of power, but they would intermarry. Their children would. Alexandria and Alexander would intermarry, and so that would bring some measure of peace to the scene. But it wasn't sufficient to please everybody. One of those Idumeans that had ingratiated himself and had come into power was a guy by the name of Antipater. Antipater thought that to ensure his man came out on top, he would appeal to the power out west. The Greeks were clearly slipping. The Romans were looking for an in, and Antipater invited this man, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great, to come and to help settle the problems of the Jews. He was all too glad to do that, because when he left with everybody being subject and under the Roman thumb. And so the Jews have lost their independence, at least in great measure, and now are going to be ruled by the dominance and the army of the Romans. They become a vassal again, though they had enjoyed that independence for a short time. Question you have at this point. I apologize for rapid fire here. I don't have the luxury of another chance to get it right. I hope you see the big picture of what's going on. You probably know this, but we're being reminded of it. So the Jews for a time had independence. But within 100 years, they had gone from being vassals of the Greeks to now vassals of a new power, Rome. We talked about those Idumeans again, and Antipater and his influence. He had ingratiated himself with the Hasmoneans. He had risen to some position of power. He was recognized by the Romans. And what happened next was, we talked about those different segments of the family that were fighting, and how that they were joined together by marriage. And Alexander and Alexandra had a daughter by the name of Mariamne. And guess who she married? She married one of those Idumeans. And his name was Herod. So Herod comes into being, and we know him historically, looking back, as an independent power, as Herod the Great. But his platform was that he was married into the important Jewish family. But Herod was a man of his own talents and his own ambitions. What do we think about Herod, this old coin, Herod Basileus, Herod the king? Well, one thing is, if you read the New Testament, you sure can't ignore Herod, because he and his family are just it seems, in a lot of places, especially the early history of the life of Christ and the church. Herod, of course, we know from the story of the birth of Christ. We also know that his son Antipas was the man who wound up killing John the Baptist. He was the man, likewise, who would see Jesus in his trial. You also remember Philip, his brother. Antipas stole Philip's wife. Quite a family. And then, of course, the next generation. Here is Agrippa, who is the fellow in Acts chapter 12 who winds up giving the order to kill James and puts Peter in prison with the same intention. Agrippa is the fellow who's eaten of worms. You remember, very dramatic and awful death for an awful man. He has a half-sister, Herodias. She's the one who Herod Antipas and Philip wind up struggling over. The next generation, after, of course, Agrippa, we have Agrippa II, who's so important in the story. As Paul comes to trial in Rome, Agrippa hears him before he makes that journey with Bernice, his sister/consort. Quite a lovely family. And then, of course, their other sister, Drusilla, is married to Felix. So the Herods certainly leave their imprint on the history. What do we remember about Herod? Well, if you look at the big picture, one thing you have to say about Herod was he was a survivor. This is a guy got more lives than a lizard. He somehow finds a way. You think about being an Idumean. He's on the low end of the scale, and yet he has raw ambition, and he's completely unprincipled, and he finds a way to make his way to the top. And so he does. And Mark Antony winds up being a man very important in his early ambitions. Antony, who was a great Roman official and one of the three triumvirate members who ruled over Rome when Rome was transitioning from the Republic to the Empire. But Mark Antony was a guy who saw in Herod a capable man. So he said, "We are willing to make you king of Judea." Isn't that a great offer? Here's the trick. You got to fight and win it first. It's a kingdom in prospect. But you got to take it. Because, as the Romans were moving in, a lot of the Jews, as well as other Greeks, just were not interested in that. They wanted to keep the old system with the Seleucids in power. So Herod had to lead armies. He gave him some soldiers, and he had to fight for his territory. We think about Herod, the king of the Jews, but he had to win that spot, and he did. He actually made a siege of Jerusalem and won that battle and took by force the kingdom that he would rule over and be ruling over when the New Testament begins. But you talk about a survivor. Not only did he survive that, by the way, if you read Josephus, maybe you have. Again, this is secular history. It's not inspired. But I tell you, Josephus goes through the history of the Jews, and sometimes you're reading those stories and you think, is this Herod or John Wayne? I mean, he, as a young guy, boy, he was something. And him riding along and doing all these things, winning these battles. Herod had his grab of power, and he was successful. Now, there's civil war in Rome, and the triumvirate falls apart, and you have Mark Antony on one side, and one of the other members of the triumvirate was a guy named Octavius, who was the adopted son of Julius Caesar, who had been murdered. And so these men there are struggling for power, and you may be aware of the fact that, again, Mark Antony, we just said, was Herod's benefactor, and so Herod backed him. Problem was, he didn't come out ahead of this. Antony winds up, you remember his girlfriend, Antony had married Octavian's sister, Octavia, and then left her for Cleopatra. You probably heard her. That sort of bugged Octavian. That's sort of what caused them to fall out, at least partly. So you may remember that story. It's been put into movies that I've never seen, but the story is there. They wind up being defeated at the Battle of Actium. They go back to Egypt. They lose another battle there, and they both commit suicide. So Antony is out. Cleopatra is out. Octavian rules the field. And Herod's backed the wrong horse. But Herod, again, survives. And he winds up going to Rome and begging for forgiveness and pleading his cause. And I'll be if the guy doesn't come out on top again. So Herod is reaffirmed as the king of Judea. And that brings us to another aspect. When you think about Herod, you think about not just a survivor, but he was a great builder. There have been many books written about Herod as the great builder. One of the things he built was a great port up in Phoenicia at a place that he called Caesarea by the sea, Caesarea Maritima. I wonder who that's named after. After you've backed the wrong horse, it might be good to build the guy a big city. So he did. He built him a big city. And it's magnificent. In the New Testament story, certainly we read about Caesarea quite a bit, don't we, Philip? This is where Cornelius was. So Caesarea becomes important in the Bible story. There we go. Sorry about that, guys. But probably we think about Herod and building, we think about the temple. One time the Jews, I think intentionally misunderstanding Jesus, said to him, it's taken us 46 years to build this temple, or it has taken 46 years to build this temple. Will you raise it up in 3 days? They were talking about not what Zerubbabel had done. That had been completed a long, long time ago, hadn't it? They were talking about the building that replaced it, really, that was built on the orders of Herod, Herod's temple. The work began about 19 BC. 10,000 skilled laborers, according to Josephus, and 1,000 Levites, because the so-called laity couldn't enter certain parts of the building. It was done with the intention of trying to ingratiate himself to the Jews. It was not done out of spite. It was not done to try to cause problems, but to solve problems. And the first thing they had to do was level the old Temple Mount and to make it into something that would allow for a much grander building. This is a great model of the temple in Solomon's day. Can you see this at all? Do you notice how that the temple is on such a small space and it's sort of stuck up there by itself? That's very different. The lay of the land was just all over the place. The undulation of the land was just sprawling along that line. But you look today even, and certainly at the models that we think of with Herod's temple, it was not like that. You know, if you think of this is a poor example. If you think of this pulpit stand here as being the old Temple Mount, you know, with all of his, and then Herod comes along and he builds these walls around it, and he fills it all in and evens it all out, and he's got this space, this huge space here, where you have courtyards and porticos, and then you can build a proper building on the top of it. And it's a magnificent, all of this was Herod's work. One fellow made the point that it was the size of 20 football fields. Just to give you the scale, in this model, here are these people walking up the step. These are people going into this great foundation, if you will, upon which the temple will be built. That's Herod. As the Jewish Talmud says, he who has not seen the temple of Herod has never seen a beautiful building. And there's probably something to be said for that. But we don't think of that exclusively. Maybe the main thing we think of is Herod the villain. And the story in Matthew chapter 2 of how that when the men from the east came and notified Herod that a king had been born, they came some time, likely more than a year, maybe closer to 2 years. They came looking for him. Herod sent them off saying, when you find him, let me know. They didn't come back. They were warned not to. Herod became angry about that, and he gave the order, in order to assure this king did not live, to grow up to be his rival. He was an old man by that point, but he didn't want to take any chances, so just slaughter all the children in Bethlehem. That's what we remember Herod for. A ruthless man. However many were killed there, it's just that the slaughter of the innocents has always been a stain upon this bloody man. By the way, you have to say he was an equal opportunity murderer. He didn't just kill strangers. If you notice the history of Herod and his growing paranoia as he got older, he killed, I don't remember, at least 2 of his wives and 3 of his sons. There's an old quote you probably have heard where Octavian is supposed to have said about Herod, his lackey, it would be safer to be Herod's hus than his huis in Greek. Hus is the word for hog, and huis is the word for son. I think it's safer to be Herod's hog than Herod's son, because Jews don't kill pigs, but they sure don't mind, he did at least, killing his own family. But in Matthew chapter 2, despite all the efforts to the contrary, Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king. And behold, the wise men from the east came to seek him. It reminds us of Psalm 2, doesn't it? One of the great Psalms. They're all great. But Psalm 2 is that psalm that begins, why do the heathen rage? And the people imagine a vain thing. The kings of the earth shall set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord, against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder. Let us cast away their cords from us. He that sits in the heavens shall laugh, and the Lord shall have them in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath, and vex them in his sore displeasure. Yet have I set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. Despite the efforts of the men like Herod, God set his king upon his holy hill of Zion. Then we find that Lord and Christ grow up eventually in Nazareth, being born in Bethlehem, growing up in Nazareth, about 30 years old, becoming a public figure, being baptized of John, tempted of the devil, the beginning of 3-year-plus ministry, work, preaching and teaching, that he was indeed the Christ, the Son of the living God, living and dying a death on the cross as a man of complete innocence for a cause not his sin, but ours. That Octavian we talked about was eventually given by the Roman Senate the title of Augustus, which means the sacred or the grand one. And he really is the first Roman emperor. Before this time, men like Julius Caesar always claimed that they were just government servants working for the people. But Augustus was the first. Now we have a Roman Empire. We probably had one for a long time, but not officially. But now we have an emperor, and his name is Augustus. Look with me over in Luke chapter 2 and in verse 1. And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. And with those words famously begins the story of the birth of Christ. And now we've come to the next phase of our study. The stage is set for the coming of the King and the coming of the kingdom. What was it that Daniel told us all those years before? We read this very early on in our study. The conclusion of his remarks about this great dream of the statue with its 4 parts and this stone cut without human hands that smashes this statue and that rises up to become a great mountain. During the reigns of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor its sovereignty left into the hands of another people. The kingdom of God won't be like Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. It will shatter and crush all of these nations, these kingdoms, and it will stand forever. And we've made the point many times before. Today you can go over and you can look at the ruins of Rome. The old Forum. I got a chance to go with Judd one time. We walked through the old Forum over there, where all these great men in their own eyes, great men in the eyes of the world, used to stand and hold power, and it's all dust and ashes now. But the kingdom of God continues to this night, and you're proof of it. That all began just in the timing that God selected, and we've come to that time in our story. And I think it's Brother Ryan is going to take us there next time and begin the story of the life of Christ. Somebody have a question or a point you would like to add to this? I've stunned you into silence, apparently. The story of the Bible in 17 periods of Bible history, beginning with the creation, the flood, scattering of the people, and the patriarchs. That's Genesis. Then we have the Exodus, wandering in the wilderness, conquest of the land, the judges, and the united kingdom, and the divided kingdom. And then Judah alone, followed by the captivity, and then the return from the captivity. And then we have the years of silence following Malachi. But that silence will certainly be broken by the story of the gospel and the life of Christ, the history of the early church, and letters to Christians. Okay. Thank you so much for your kind attention this quarter. I've certainly enjoyed being with you. I may have mentioned this to you. Forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but you know, Donald and I were been on trying to get ahead with our teaching list, and so we put the list out there, and it's our fault. I'm not blaming anybody, but we looked on that list, and the adult class filled up for a year. And I thought, well, Donald, we better get our name on there. We may be dead before we get another chance here. So I won't have this privilege again, maybe filling in along for a while, but I certainly have enjoyed it. I'll be teaching some other classes and looking forward to that as well. But I sure have appreciated this time with you, and hope that it's been of some benefit to you. All right, thank you so much.
for us to start our worship service this evening. If you'd like, go ahead and mark number 828. 828, that will be the song after the lesson this evening. Then if you'd like to, go ahead and turn over to 373. 373, Be Still My Soul. And let's sing just verses 1 through 4. Verses 1 through 4. Do, mi, sol, mi. Be still, my soul, the Lord is on thy side. Bear patiently the cross of grief or pain. Leave to thy God to order and provide. In every change he faithful will remain. Be still, my soul, thy best, thy heavenly friend, through thorny ways leads to a joyful end. Be still, my soul, thy God doth undertake to guide the future as he has the past. Thy hope, thy confidence, let nothing shake. All now mysterious shall be bright at last. Be still, my soul, the waves and winds still know his voice who ruled them while he dwelt below. Be still, my soul, when dearest friends depart, and all is darkened in the veil of tears. Then shalt thou better know his love, his heart, who comes to soothe thy sorrow and thy fears. Be still, my soul, thy Jesus can repay from his own fullness as he takes away. Be still, my soul, the hour is hastening on, when we shall be forever with the Lord. When disappointment, grief, and fear are gone, sorrow forgot, love's purest joys restored. Be still, my soul, when change and tears are past, all safe and blessed we shall meet at last.
Hello. In this short invitation, I would like to, well, the short time we have, just consider faith and trust in the Lord and read some scriptures and maybe take some examples from it. The Bible often uses sheep to describe us. You know, I haven't been around sheep very often, but I know they're very stupid animals and they completely require a man to take care of them. They're not capable of taking care of themselves. Now, I haven't been around sheep. I have been around chickens, though. I do have chickens. Chickens are probably a close second for maybe dumbest animals on the farm, but they are endearing at times. It's probably not a fair comparison to God. The gulf between me and God's a lot greater than me and the chickens, and He created us both. But I think He does allow that comparison to help teach us, and that's why sheep is often used in the Bible. You know, in particular, some of my chickens, you kind of notice a difference between them. Some have more trust in me, ultimately. In particular ones, they trust me. You see where they wait patiently on me. They're even aware that I take care of them. I'm their master. And in particular ones, they want to be close to me. They're comforted by me. They'll sit at my feet. They have a nature that is quiet, gentle, innocent. And then, you have a contrast. We have our rooster. We may have to get rid of the rooster, but it's the opposite at times. It's not a whole lot of trust, not gentle. At least it does have fear of me. You can say that much, maybe in contrast for man and how they approach God sometimes. But the chickens, you can see that they recognize that I'm their master. They have trust, some manner of faith in me. I wonder if at times it's the same between us and the Lord. And I'd just like to talk more briefly about that intense trust, which is faith, or faith in the Lord. I consider sometimes, can I surpass my expectations of my chickens and know and trust and have faith in my Lord? It's that unique, deep trust based on things that's not seen, which is faith, which is unique to us, unique to mankind. It has the power making us of great value to God. I'm sure He loves us even more and has the power to save us. I think it's maybe a strength within man, which is faith, to have trust in things which aren't seen. Man is not good at, we're not able to live a perfect life. We're not able to be sin-free, but we have the ability to lean on God. I think it's inherently in us. I think we're designed this way. I think it's a strength in man. Just like some of my hands, they naturally do that. I like to read some verses. Start at Hebrews 11:1 and then 2 Corinthians, but I think you have a good definition of Hebrews 11:1 of faith. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. I think this is a special type of trust that we have in God, knowing we cannot see Him, but we know He's there. We can feel Him. We reach out for Him. We look for a reward from Him. And God calls us to this. He calls us to walk by faith, not to rely on our own eyes of the things of this world which we see. 2 Corinthians 5:7, particularly with 2 Corinthians chapter 5, then I'll look at chapter 4. But 5:7, for we walk by faith, not by sight. It's our guide in life, looking to the unseen, looking to God. And in 2 Corinthians 4:18, it further talks about this. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. So man is looking at life through an eternal purpose. We know that this life fades, and we recognize that even if it does, it's better so, because then we're with the Lord, and then we're content. Everything we see in life we know that is decaying and soon to be destroyed. Our flesh is fragile, but our souls are resilient, being kept by the Lord. You know, Paul, a little bit further up in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, wrote of himself in 7 and 8, "But we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellency of the power may be of God and not of us. We are troubled on every side, yet not distressed. We are perplexed, but not in despair." And further down in 16 and 17 verses, "For which cause we faint not, but through our outward man perish, yet the inner man is renewed day by day. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, working for us a far more exceeding eternal weight of glory." So we're remembering the eternal glory outweighs all life's troubles, the stresses and the pain. You know, like the chickens, you know, we wait on the Lord. We look for him, even though we don't see him. You know, the opposite concern is walking by feelings. You know, feelings are not something you want to live by. Up, down, inconsistency of them. You know, examples, today I don't feel like going to church, or I don't like this man, so I don't want to do good for him. I'm afraid to do what's right. You know, blessed is the one that's going to disregard himself and walks in the Lord, putting his anxieties on the Lord and simply following his will. You know, some scriptures I wrote, Psalm 55 and 22, "Cast thy burdens on the Lord, and he shall sustain thee." Or 1 Peter 5 and 7, "Casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you." You know, walking in the Lord, we simply follow him, casting our troubles on him in prayer and thought, knowing that the Lord is our caretaker. You know, and lastly, I'd like to make the point, you know, walking by faith, we don't trust our own intuition. It's an important aspect of faith, you know, to follow the Lord's will, even though we don't understand it. In Proverbs 3:5, just something to think about as we go through this week. Proverbs 3:5 is a favorite verse of mine. 5 through 7. "Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Be not wise in thine own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil." You know, the Lord even, I remember where he talked about, "The sheep know my voice and will not follow another." He calls us. So it's just something to consider as we go through this week. Do we know our own master? Are we better than chickens or dumb animals? Do we follow his will? Do we completely follow his will even if we don't understand it? Do we live by his ways? Does he direct us? Are we looking to the unseen? It has the power to save us. You know, there will be a time when the Lord returns in flame and fire, dissolving the elements. Every knee will bow then. Everybody will believe in God at that time. Now faith is a credit to us because we're looking to the unseen, and we'll be accredited by God for doing so. You don't want to wait till every man is bowing their knee before God and he's returned. It's too late then. There's no value in it. Everybody will believe in God then. So on that, I would like to offer an invitation. If you would like to come and be baptized, if you would like to direct your life to follow into unseen, to follow God, to do what we're naturally designed to do, we'd like to help you at this time. If you would like to come forward as we sing.
Jesus, the loving shepherd, calleth thee now to come into the fold of safety, where there is rest and room. Come in the strength of manhood, come in the morn of youth, in
I'd like to thank Justin for the thoughts he shared with us this evening. We do have some that are visiting with us again. Good to see y'all. Thank y'all for being here this evening. We do have several that were away from us that have made it back safely. Thankful for that. Good to see those back with us. It was mentioned to me that Audrey is sick and Maya has a fever now. Elizabeth is home with the kids this evening. Also, Rhonda Drake is not with us this evening. She is recovering from the surgery. The surgery did go well, and hopefully it'll be a good, quick recovery for her. And Luke is doing better. Good to see he and the rest of the family are all able to be out with us this evening. Mike Tice is not here this evening. His brother-in-law passed away, and he is over in Tupelo, Mississippi. I'm not sure if it's the viewing or what have you, the funeral maybe tomorrow, but he's over in Tupelo due to the death of his brother-in-law. So please remember that family in your prayers. Also, we missed the Jollies this evening. Laura has been diagnosed with COVID, and also Alan is sick. So it very well could be COVID as well. But let's remember Laura and Alan in our prayers that they'll get better soon. Kendall and Kelsey are worshiping at Golden Springs tonight. And also, please remember Kendall in your prayers. She sprained her ankle pretty bad yesterday, and she's in a brace, but she's working through it. So hopefully that'll recover. That'll heal quickly for her. Also, let's remember Rodney, who is, as I understand it, still out of town in Colorado. That's all the announcements I have as far as folks that are not with us this evening. I'll remind us that we've got the fifth Sunday coming up, and this next Sunday will be the fifth Sunday, and this will be the start of the new quarter. And also, I understand it, Brother Gable will be offering the lesson Sunday night. So we look forward to hearing a lesson from Gable. Yes, sir.
I think Gable is going to be away Sunday night. I'm supposed to speak Sunday night, but Sunday morning is.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Sorry about
great.
that mix-up.
No, I'm sorry. So Sunday morning will be Brother Gable, and Wes Sunday night. Look forward to that. Is there any other announcements that a man might have this evening? Yes, sir.
Shania will be traveling back tomorrow.
Okay,
Prayers on that road.
Shania traveling back. Thank you. Hope that goes well. And again, all those that we've mentioned last Sunday, let's keep those in our prayers. Sister Annette Armstrong, Ryan's mother, as well as the Stishers, Sister Kathy, also Sister Donna Tice, as she struggles with her health, and the Stishers, and those that we want to continue to remember in our prayers. There doesn't seem to be any other announcements we've got this evening, so we're going to ask our brother Chris Bradley, if he would, to come forward and lead us in a word of prayer, and then after this, we'll be dismissed.
Father in heaven, we're grateful to you for this day, for a time we could be together, study your word. Pray that as we have opportunity, we'll be prepared and be ready in our minds to learn your will, to serve you, to be lights to others. Ask your blessings on our sick that were mentioned, for those of our church here and our family members too that have undergone surgeries. Pray you'll heal their bodies. For our regular members who suffer so much, the Stishers and Sister Vines, Sister Tice, pray you'll be with these folks. Sister Jolly, pray you'll be with them. Be with us and our brethren as we're traveling. Pray you'll be with us in this church and bless our efforts in the upcoming year, and bless us as you see fit. In Christ's name, amen.